Welcome to this lecture on the Exodus, Part 1. A little bit of background before we begin looking at some of the major themes of the first part of Exodus. First of all, verses 1, 6 through 7 connect Exodus with the book of Genesis, so there is continuity, especially with Genesis 46. Also, just to note that it is difficult to place the Exodus historically. The pharaohs are not named either in the Joseph story or in Exodus. There are no Egyptian records which refer to any of the events, which is not surprising since so much has been lost because of time and the fragility of the writing material available at that time. Also, biblical chronology is not always consistent. It's a little bit more schematic. Many place Joseph during the reign of Hyksos invaders. These were West Asiatics who moved into Egypt, conquered it, and reigned from about 1780 to 1570 BCE. That would make the time of oppression during the rule of perhaps Ramses II, who carried out many building projects, which makes sense of the kind of work that the Israelite slaves are forced to do. And this would have been in the 13th century BCE. We can note that the first mention of Israel is in the Stela of Merneptah in 1220 BCE. Chapters 1 through 15 can be seen overall as a contest between Yahweh and Pharaoh, caused by a crisis and then deliverance. The crisis that we see at the very beginning of the book is that Pharaoh has forgotten Joseph, and therefore the Israelites, who have become numerous, have been made slaves. Pharaoh has taken on the prerogatives of God by killing male children of the Israelites. If we remember back in Genesis 9, there is a declaration by God that all life belongs to him. So the Pharaoh also puts the Israelites to hard service. The Hebrew term here is avad. This is the same word used in regard to service to Yahweh. Moses' words, therefore, come as a direct threat to Pharaoh's power. In other words, Pharaoh is having the Israelites do service, avad, but Moses tells Pharaoh that they are to come out into the wilderness, to the mountain, to be of service to Yahweh. In other words, Yahweh is their true ruler. And this is especially so because Pharaoh was considered divine in Egyptian thought, and so there is a challenge to his power and his sovereignty. Yahweh declares that he will deliver his people in a series of acts and amid this contest with Pharaoh. Now, at first, Yahweh's plans for deliverance seem very fragile. They rely so much on the people involved. How can this possibly lead to deliverance for the people? There are no major armies coming in. There is no, weapons of mass destruction that are coming up against Pharaoh and his armies. Rather, the ordinary people are used as part of God's plan. The midwives carry out the heroic task of saving the Israelite babies. Moses is hidden in a basket, saved from death, and put in a position where he will know the Egyptian court. But so much could go wrong. He could have, just been carried off down the river or died. Moses' murder of an Egyptian creates a huge complication. What if he's caught? What if he is killed? Is he reliable? He has spilled blood. Moses is also resistant to God's call. He doesn't immediately volunteer. He kind of puts forth all kinds of arguments why he is not equipped. He asks the question, who am I to lead the Egyptians? And God answers, I will be with you. Moses stalls for time. What is your name? God declares his name, I am who I am. A rather cryptic saying, and I am Yahweh. But they'll never believe me, says Moses. And Yahweh promises that there will be signs that will convince the Israelites. Again, Moses stalls, I am not good with words. God promises to help him speak. And finally, in desperation, Moses says, send somebody else. And Yahweh graciously says, I will send Aaron with you, and he will speak for you. All of these are seeming fragilities or even threats to God's plans for deliverance. Part of the conflict or contest with Pharaoh is the revealing of God's name. When he calls Moses, he declares his name not only to the Israelites, but essentially on the world stage, declaring himself ultimately to Pharaoh, to the nations in general. God is introducing himself beyond the people of Israel. And in that introduction, he says much that is cryptic. In 14a, he declares, I am who I am, I will be who I will be who I will be. He says, I am has sent me to you. And he declares himself to be the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. This is important because it makes it very clear that Pharaoh has no claim on the people, but rather God does, because he is the God of the fathers. Just a side note here, on theories about the origins of the name Yahweh, you can see that I have this written in all capitals because it is unclear how it originally would have pronounced, because Jewish tradition for hundreds of years refused to pronounce it for fear of taking it in vain or using it for magical purposes. Even today, many people will not pronounce it. Originally, it may have been based on what is called a causative form in Hebrew, to cause something to happen. He caused to be or creates. And that is the vocalization that you may be aware of Yahweh. The Septuagint reads the present tense, the simple form of the verb I am, ego eimi hoon, which could also be a dynamic sense of I happen or something like that. Some read it as the future tense, I will be, which is meant to prevent magical control. In other words, I will be as future events reveal me to be. Others believe that this declaration of I will be or I am indicates God's faithfulness. Kind of I will be with you, a declaration of his presence. As we said, there are many events which really show that this is a contest between Yahweh and Pharaoh. As we saw earlier, Pharaoh has assumed the prerogatives of Yahweh by taking the life of the male children among the Israelites. He is in competition with God. Another thing that indicates this contest is that Moses is called as an emissary to Pharaoh. It's like God is another king who is sending an ambassador, a representative, who is the one who represents God to Pharaoh. And in what he tells Moses, he makes clear his own claim and his own power. So he declares that he has seen the affliction of my people. They are his people. He is their God, not Pharaoh. And he says to Moses, you shall serve God upon this mountain. You shall no longer serve Pharaoh. And what is to be told to Pharaoh is that the people are going to go to the mountain to sacrifice to the Lord our God, not to Pharaoh, not to the Egyptian gods. And God makes it clear that Pharaoh will be compelled by a mighty hand, God's own. The phrase that occurs over and over, "I will harden his heart," also signals that this is a contest or a conflict between Pharaoh and Yahweh. There are two purposes for the deliverance. One is to obtain the freedom of the people, but also to let Pharaoh, to let all of Egypt know who is the true God. He declares that Israel is his firstborn son, and Pharaoh has no claim. And the killing of the Egyptian firstborn is a judgment against Egypt's effort to kill Yahweh's firstborn. Pharaoh continues the conflict by acting in retaliation for this allegiance to Yahweh. This is a power struggle in chapter 5. Pharaoh makes the hard service even harder by refusing the use of straw in the making of bricks. It is clear at all times that it is really Yahweh who is in control. In chapter 6, you have these statements, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, and I will take you for my people." And in verse 29, "I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, all that I am speaking to you." But in Pharaoh's refusal to let the people go, he is asserting his own authority against Yahweh's. He is in competition